Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the scenes is Nicole Burdick, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time. We recently covered what happens in Strixhaven, but the set gave us a ton of legendary creatures who were mostly featured in the side stories. So today, we're going to take a closer look at them and the colleges they represent. First, a quick refresher. Strixhaven is a school located on a plane called Arcavios. The plane itself is quite large and is several thousand years old, with the school being a fairly new addition coming along about 700 years ago. It was founded by 5 elder dragons who were born during the plane's creation, and for once we actually get a snippet of information about how that happened. Apparently, 2 existing planes were close enough that their mana started to overlap, and from that maelstrom of energy, a new plane was formed. This overlapping mana got tangled up in what would become known as the Snarls, and there are at least 6 that we have seen so far, one for each enemy color pair, plus whatever is located within the Hall of Oracles. Some people have speculated that this was actually an allied pair snarl, probably red and black, as it was used to summon the Blood Avatar, and that would suggest that the rest of the combinations are still out there. Indeed, Arcavios is a huge plane, and so far all of the action has only taken place in the upper continent, leaving plenty of stuff to discover on future visits. Oh, and just in case you've never heard those terms before, take a look at the back of any standard Magic card. The color dots that are next to each other are called allied pairs, while the ones across from each other are enemy pairs. Strixhaven is a set about enemy pairs. Anyway, Arcavios is created in a sort of planar Big Bang, and then the Snarls give birth to 5 elder dragons. Though again, there could be more, hiding out there elsewhere on the plane. These are just the ones that we've seen so far. Over time, other life forms developed on the plane, and the humanoids among them started to experiment with using magic. This led to what's referred to as the Blood Age, a time full of conflict and war, as each fledgling society tried to gain the upper hand over its rivals. The dragons were furious at the others for using magic as they did, but they eventually realized that education would be the best way to prevent future wars and ensure a peaceful and stable plane. So they created Strixhaven, with each of the 5 dragons leading up a college that would be named after them. Which brings us to the present day. The dragons are still around, but have left the school in the capable hands of their trusted deans and other faculty members, and the plane has become a relatively stable and peaceful place, just like they wanted. Students come to Strixhaven from all over the plane, and in some extreme cases, they even come from other planes. Their first year is spent on general studies, which are reflected in the set's colorless lesson cards. These are the foundational spells of any good magic user. During that first year, students are also encouraged to think about which college they would like to formally enter. This is similar to how we would declare our major. Rutha, for example, is an orc shaman who is following her mother's footsteps in Prismari. This is the College of Artistic Expression. It features music, theater, and art with the goal of stimulating the mind in the blue approach, or stimulating the soul, which is the red approach. So in Rutha's side story, she is struggling to produce a work of art for one of her classes. She's the 5th generation of her family to attend Strixhaven, and her mother was a highly respected artist, which gives Rutha a lot to live up to. Her mother's style was very precise and technical, but Rutha is more interested in tapping into her wild side and creating art that is driven by the fire within. The Prismari deans get involved. Uvilda expects Rutha to match her mother's perfection and sets a strict deadline for her next submission, which only makes Rutha stress out even more. That's when Nasari steps in and tells Rutha, hey, it's fine. You can create anything you want. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to come from within, and it will be great. Nasari is all about the outcome, while Uvilda is more about the method. And while both are valid ways of creating art, Rutha ends up creating her elemental masterpiece under the encouragement of Nasari. It was a pretty simple story of individual self-discovery as Rutha learned how to embrace her own style of creation. But it also ties into one of Strixhaven's larger themes, which is establishing your own place within your family. That idea continued with the next side story, which featured Dina, a student of Witherbloom College. Dina is a dryad, and through her story, we learn a bit about how these creatures come to exist, at least on the plane of Arcavios. We're told that when a dryad senses their time is at an end, they find a tree that is also dying and curl up by its roots. The earth reclaims their body, and then a new dryad springs forth from the tree, knowing only their own name, which is the same as her mother's. So yeah, all of the dryads here are Groot, but they see each other as Glade sisters. Their family structure is generational, and they're connected by point of origin rather than heritage. In her story, Dina's glade has mostly been killed off by a blight, and she looks for a way to rejuvenate it. She comes across a book that contains a powerful resurrection spell, which requires a specific ingredient: Essus root. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's the same thing Liliana used in the hopes of saving her brother Josu. And you might remember how that turned out. And since Liliana is now a professor here at Strixhaven, she has a small terrarium where Dina is able to find a sample of the root, which doesn't natively grow on this plane, meaning Liliana brought some with her from Dominaria. Dina steals the root and tries to enact the spell, but it gets interrupted accidentally by Killian. And so instead of restoring the glade, it creates this big bog monster, and the two of them have to work together to stop it. In the end, they do defeat the beast, but Dina is unable to save the glade. Her new friendship with Killian, however, teaches her that family is what you make of it, and it can be found wherever you are. In a way, this mirrors Liliana's arc, right? At first, she was afraid to lose her brother Josu, but eventually learned to care for her new family, the Gatewatch, before moving on to her next adventure, being a professor at Strixhaven, where she now watches over her students. Witherbloom is the College of Essence Studies, and they seek to answer whether life exists to propagate itself, which is the green idea, or if it exists merely to escape the clutches of death, which is the black side of it. Students will often power their spells by draining the life essence out of creatures called pests. The set did give us a legendary one named Blex, but he did not appear anywhere in the story. The Deans did, though. There's Lisette, a healer and herbalist, who even tried to save Dina's glade when it first began to suffer from the blight. She encouraged Dina to try and make friends on campus, which ends up happening thanks to the adventure she shared with Killian. Then there's Valentine, a vampire warlock who draws a lot of criticism for how he treats living creatures, but also seems to get a lot of respect for his research and discoveries. Oh, and it turns out that book Dina found did in fact belong to Liliana, who destroyed it at the conclusion of the story, firmly putting that dark part of her history behind her. Speaking of history, the next short story looks at Lorehold, the college obsessed with archaeomancy. Quintorius, or Quint as he is often called, is a Loxodon who was expelled from the military academy on account of his clumsiness, which makes him the Jar Jar Binks of magic, if you want to get right down to it. Anyway, Quint grew up among poor nomadic shepherds, so he's looking to bring some prestige to his family name by being the first among them to actually attend Strixhaven. Quint loves to study. He spends most of his time in the Biblioplex trying to understand the intricacies of the Blood Age, but once in a while he does go out and do field work too. As part of one of his classes, he gets assigned a statue, and he must learn from its spirit. You see, on Arcavios, spirits are able to embody a statue that resembles them, which Lorehold loves to take advantage of, as you can find on the flavor text of several cards. So Quint gets paired up with what he believes is like a boring ass spirit who died in a cave somewhere and only wants to talk about the types of food he liked to eat when he was alive. Eventually, though, the spirit reveals he was on the verge of discovering the lost city of Xanthafar, home to the Loxodons before they all became nomads. This, of course, is of huge interest to Quint, so he and the spirit statue head out to a dig site overseen by Hoffrey Ghostforge. Hoffrey is an interesting character himself. He was originally a student of Prismari, but eventually switched to Lorehold. He's now the only known person who can call forth a spirit without a statue for it to possess. Yet, despite that, even he didn't realize his dig site was right on top of a lost city. Instead, Quint and his mentor spirit find the entrance, which is where their story pretty much ends. The deans are only mentioned in passing in this one, but their ideals definitely weigh on Quint as he progresses through the story. Initially, he is a big believer in obeying rules and following the structured side of society, which is the white mana half of this college under the watchful eyes of Dean Augusta. After forging a better relationship with his spirit mentor, though, he starts to embrace the thrill of discovery, and even admits to himself that Dean Plarg doesn't like quitters, which encourages him to press on and find that lost Loxodon city. Turns out, Quint is not the only one looking for something lost. Zimone of the Quandrix College is seeking information about her grandmother. Quandrix is all about the study of math, including patterns, fractals, symmetry, and how to bring those principles to life. That's the green half. Or how to continue to ponder their abstract nature, which is the blue half. Zimone has been receiving secret gifts for the past few years, blue and green ribbons sent by her grandmother. More ribbons appear on each birthday, increasing by what is known as a Fibonacci sequence. Zimone's grandmother was a brilliant mathematician and former Strixhaven professor, but nobody will explain what happened to her. So Zimone does some of her own digging and ends up talking to Cody, the sentient book that usually hangs out around the Biblioplex. Cody explains that Zimone's grandmother solved the Vorzani conjecture, which is apparently a way to mathematically predict the future or unlock some sort of ultimate power, but it wasn't really made clear in the story. The important part is that Extus and the Auric wanted this information, and they captured Zimone's grandmother to get it. So yes, this story takes place before the main one because Extus is still alive here, and he is definitely dead after the events of Strixhaven itself. Anyway, Zimone's grandmother doesn't want to surrender the conjecture to the Auric, so she uses magic to erase her own memory. Then, Extus captures Zimone, believing that she has also solved the conjecture. He says he knows about the ribbons, and he knows what Cody told her, but it's wrong. He claims that the conjecture itself drove Zimone's grandmother mad, and the Auric were only trying to help. There's this big discussion about how the school of Strixhaven is too strict with rules about who can use what types of magic, and if only the Auric were in control, they'd be more fair about things. Some of Zimone's friends show up to save her, and they're about to attack Extus when Zimone stops them and says there's no reason to fight because he was just about to let me go. Which is not at all true, but based on how Zimone spoke with one of her deans earlier in the story, I think she just really doesn't like confrontation and will do almost anything to avoid it. So she goes back to the school, and now almost nobody trusts her, right? Her friends and her professors all think that she's working for the Auric, and the only thing that has made her happy since returning to the school was getting a note from her grandmother, inviting her to a facility that cares for people affected by magic. The final scene is Zimone visiting her grandmother, who we are told is only sometimes lucid. It is never confirmed if this is due to the conjecture or due to the memory loss spell, as suggested by Cody. Both of the Quandrix Deans do appear in this story. Kian seems to be the tougher of the two. She is concerned about Zimone potentially studying the conjecture, and then she's extra suspicious of Zimone's behavior alongside Ixtus. Imbraham, on the other hand, is more paternal towards Zimone. He even mentions how much she reminds him of her own grandmother, who he describes as the best student he ever taught. The final of the 5 side stories follows Killian and Silverquill College, which focuses on the magic of words. Dean Ambrose is Killian's father, and he expects his son to follow in his own footsteps and become an eloquencer who uses black magic exclusively. This style of wordsmithing is harsh and destructive and fueled by personal ambition. On the other side of things, we find the uplifting and creative side of Silverquill, guided by the white-aligned Dean Shale. So Killian is under tremendous pressure to embrace the darker half of the college, and he is indeed one of their best students, which makes him an especially tempting target for recruitment by the Auric. In Killian's story, another Silverquill student befriends him, but turns out to be really an Auric agent. She offers him a way out of his father's oppressive rule and the opportunity to be recognized for how great he really is. Killian is able to resist her offer thanks to help from his Inkling, which encourages him to tap into some white mana spells. Killian embraces this and is able to protect another group of students as they come under attack from mage hunters. In the end, even Dean Ambrose accepts Killian's choice and realizes supportive magic has just as much place on campus as destructive. When Strixhaven was announced, and we learned it was a set about a magical school, I saw a lot of people assume it would be strongly influenced by Harry Potter, perhaps the most famous magical school story in the world. And that wound up being somewhat true for the main storyline, but to me, these side stories do a much better job of representing the true college experience, especially the part about finding yourself and claiming your own identity within your family. It's not an accident that that theme was present in all 5 stories. Rutha breaks away from her family tradition and learns to create art her way. Dina tries to save her glade, but learns family can be made from the people around you rather than where you came from. Quint tries to fit in at the military academy and then hides in the library before rediscovering the lost home of his people. And Zimone looks to reconnect with her forgotten grandmother through a shared love of math, not caring if everyone else thinks she's now working with the Auric. And then there's Killian, who had the most overt and intense family relationship out of the 5, trying to become his own student of Silverquill while suffering under the critical eye of his own father. Almost all of these characters start out closer to one color of magic, and by the end of their story, they begin to lean toward the other for their respective college. This is also true in real life, as new experiences help us break old traditions and expectations and allow us to grow as people. Overall, I found the side stories for Strixhaven to be excellent, and I hope that this trend continues. But what about you? Which uncommon legend is now your favorite? Let me know down in the comments, and then make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya!